Okay. All right, so I know relative to the headline we put on this video around referring to ZBA accounts as a health system CFO blind spot may be a little heavy-handed. But if that does manage to draw some attention to this conversation, would you feel like it was worth it to be heavy-handed in that way?
Absolutely.
Okay, because I know you've got great value to convey in this conversation here. So you suggest that 1% or more of net revenue can remain in zero balance accounts. Is that for real?
Yeah, I mean, that's can be a wide range. So yes, that's very real. It can be a really wide range, though. I mean, that's not to say every health system, every hospital has the same kind of opportunity in their zero balance accounts. But you can range really anywhere from somewhere in that 0.5% range to 1.5%, upwards depending on the scenario.
And do you typically find that the perspective is that there's maybe they're aware that there's value in there, but it's too difficult to get to, too expensive to get to, or they're not aware that there's value there, or is it a combination?
Yeah, I think it can be a combination, and I think it's some of what the feedback that they're getting as well on formulating that opinion, and it may just be, yeah, there may be something incrementally there. We don't think it's real material. We're modeling our variances. Or I've even heard we're modeling our variances, but we're having so many issues with our modeled variance that it's not even materially enough, working those because we have so much noise in that. If you're hearing anything like that, you definitely need to speak to a ZBA vendor, just because there is certainly material opportunity to be out there to be collected.
So you've mentioned something interesting, which I think is a perspective that you have because trend actually sits in between payers and providers. You've said payers continue validating after payment, but providers don't tend to have such a crisp discipline around that. Why does that matter?
Yeah, I think just by nature, revenue cycle teams are operationally designed to move forward, to go forward, keep your eye on the ball, be proactive, keep moving forward. And with that, and also just not having the resource, there's enough resources thrown in revenue cycle at getting a dollar collected that spending more internally to go behind yourself and try to have a non-biased, non-critical eye. That's a real challenge to dedicate, the resources into doing that. So I think really it's, revenue cycle teams are built to look forward, and it's not that payers are doing it alone either. They're leveraging vendors to go look retrospectively. And we've talked before about, really the concept of the finish lines being different. The payers continue to receive more and more information. The information you have ended at the time of your claim, and however that adjudicated, and maybe that patient, right, then had additional services, but on that claim, that's really where that ended. And so looking from a data mining perspective, a contractual variance perspective, looking internally at your own operations where there's opportunity, and then where you have work to do with the payers paying you at your contracted rates is wildly important.
So one of the ways that I deal with blind spots is by arming myself with questions to ask. I'm wondering if you can give us the questions that CFOs should be asking in order to address their own blind spots.
Sure. I think getting an understanding of who's working your modeled contractual variances in your system. Is that being done internally? Is that being done by a vendor partner? You need to understand that. And what type of recoveries you're getting out of that, right? Sure. And also, what kind of false variances do you have coming out of that, so you know how clean your modeling truly is. And then two, where is ZBA activity happening? Do you have a ZBA vendor? What are they recovering? And are you doing it internally? Same question. And then I think at what frequency is it being reviewed as well? So, there's different approaches in zero balance account recovery, and you'll find vendors that will maybe do quarterly reviews, and maybe you have an expectation of those are ongoing. I'm placing my files regularly. I expect that I'm going to, identify and collect on my ZBA inventory as real time as possible. Those are all good questions to start asking and start getting a feel for where you're at, does, your total recoveries and your contractual or your modeled contractual variances and your ZBA efforts, are they in a reasonable range for what you'd expect? And if they're extremely low, are your other metrics so clean that, you're have very low first pass denials, you have low denial write-offs, and that would align to the fact that you don't have as much opportunity in your zero balance account. You just need to kind of fact check that with some other metrics to make sure that it kind of lines up to expectations.
Do you find that CFOs or other revenue cycle leaders have a concern that having a zero balance analysis in place has the potential to be disruptive?
I don't think those that are familiar with the process would think of it as disruptive. I have seen, and you could understand those that maybe have not worked with a ZBA vendor before, and when there's identifications of things that maybe were in exhausted accounts or something that fell through the cracks, and maybe, I think it's natural to take that as as an operator. You're working with a vendor partner to do this very thing, but it still doesn't feel good when something slipped through the cracks of your shop. And at the size and complexity that we deal with, there's no way that those things don't happen. But also, if you're not familiar with that process, that can feel a little bit uncomfortable at first. But what really outshines that is the the recovery and the cash impact, and ultimately net revenue impact you're getting from that. And it should be the partnership and the insights you're getting back from that vendor really should become so vital that you don't feel like you can maximize your operations without their view and their expertise and their feedback.
Cash is a great cure for disruption.
That's right.
So in the context of ZBA, why do recovered dollars here behave differently financially than traditional AR recovery?
Yeah, these are fully resolved, fully reserved in this instance. So every dollar you collect is straight to the bottom line. So you have an immediate balance sheet impact, immediate cash impact. And then over time, with that sustained recovery and that ZBA opportunity, you also start, 6, 9, 12 months, you're starting to impact your reserve methodology. And as you look in, at your hindsight reporting, modeling, and you have that sustained improvement, you really can start quantifying what that net revenue lift off of that ZBA program has been.
And I'm imagining this is a lot like denials, where you can address and be effective at actually addressing root cause upstream. And then so you would expect those particular denials to diminish, and then new things are going to happen where more denials are happening. As you assess what it was that allowed value to exist in an account that had been closed, you may deal with those things and prevent those, but other things will continue to arise. Is that a similar?
Yeah. Throughout the journey for our clients, we definitely expect that in the beginning, and this depends on what the prior processes were. Did they have someone internally looking at this? Was no one looking at it? Was there a vendor? And that can all look a little bit different. But early on in the engagement, typically there's a good pickup of opportunity as we can look back and not just on the look forward. So there's a good opportunity there. But what we expect as we partner through prevention is you kind of get to that normalized identification and start recovering, months 3 and kind of 4, and you expect that to extend really through the first 12 months of the engagement. Ultimately, though, as you're starting to see that cash increase, you're starting to then realize some of that net revenue impact. And if we've had a very successful partnership collectively, the provider and us are, we're working hand in hand to drive some of the prevention. And we actually expect beyond that year to 18-month kind of period to actually have our recoveries go down, because more and more is being handled up front, and we've put in prevention efforts, because there's always going to be more holes to fill. And if you're not filling them as you go, that's where you start getting underwater with all of these things. But ultimately, if our providers are partnering with us on that prevention piece, we expect those recoveries to go down, and that's a good indication for us.
So generally, what I'm seeing is, vendors that are offering zero balance analysis, zero balance account review, the claims they're making is in like the 50 to 100 basis point range, maybe 150. Is that meaningful? I mean, is that like worthy of attention? Is actually going to be a meaningful impact? Can you help me understand that?
Oh, that's that can be a game changer, right? From a financial standpoint, on very slim and some in some scenarios non-existent margins. Half a point that can completely change, right, that financial picture, and sustained improvement on that obviously completely changes that as your model continues to evolve, right, and catch up to this new improved collectability. Then it's to continue improving that and continue to exceed the 100%. But that's worth more every time because you've already have the improved performance baked into that baseline.
And tell me if I have this right. My sense is that, from a lift standpoint, from the provider side, relative to other solutions, this is a very light lift and still getting the 100 basis points, 150 basis points results.
Extremely light lift. Really the largest lift is getting the data, the files that are needed, any access, right, any required training. And outside of that, it's just partnering with us to ensure that that we're aligned on process, and then be engaged and so forth, and partner with us on the prevention piece. But as far as the action, the doing part of all of that, we're going to go through, mine that data. We're going to bring forward the insights. We're going to bring forward the ways to resolve that and prevent them. We're going to do all of the follow-up effort, all of the resolution and recovery from a payer perspective.
All right. We have a lightning round coming up here, but before I enter that, is there anything else that, if you're thinking about from the perspective of a health system leader, CFO, VP revenue cycle, et cetera, is there anything else from like a top-level guidance standpoint that you haven't been able to touch on?
No, I think we've covered, the vast majority of it, but I would say sometimes it can feel like, as a provider, you're there, and maybe it's a little bit more passive of a relationship when it's with a ZBA vendor because, well, they're just bringing in extra dollars at the end, they're an extra set of eyes. I would challenge that really that should be a very close relationship because that's the vendor that can see all the warts. Oh. Because you have only a portion of that, right, and other things. So when we're really taking that introspective look at the data from a data mining standpoint, if I'm going to go get knowledge about where I have breakdowns and where I have opportunity, that's the first vendor I'm looking at. So it should be a very close relationship and one that you look to that partner as your subject matter expert. And if you approach it from that perspective and partner on the prevention piece, that's how you get successful programs and successful, tangible financial results out of ZBA.
That's really interesting. It's almost like if there's a clinical analogy on that, it's like ZBA analysis is more like a blood panel. Right? You can really get to see so many of the maladies or what have you that may be happening within the patient in that way. ZBA is giving you a similar lens into our ends.
That's absolutely right. That's a great analogy. I've never heard that one. That's a great analogy.
All right, so we'll go lightning round. And I know the answer to this, but is zero balance really zero?
Absolutely not. Okay. Absolutely not.
All right, I figured that was the answer. Why don't providers audit like payers do?
Yeah, I think like we talked about, our revenue cycle teams are fundamentally structured to go forward, to be proactive, to try to resolve. It's a challenge enough to collect your debit balances. Yep. And so adding resources and dedicating more time to looking at accounts that have been resolved, that can be a tough sell.
I get you. The last question I have for you, is this found money or earned money?
Found money is earned money in this instance because it was earned money. It had to be found, but every penny of that was earned. So there's no reason not to be fully aggressively pursuing it.
Sure. All right. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time on this. I think that the opportunity that's available in ZBA is substantial, that you've been able to provide this guidance. Maybe one last question for you would be, if there's a provider that already has a ZBA vendor in place, what's your thought about a second pass?
Yeah, I think there's certainly good opportunity in that for you to. There's no risk in it, right? So That's always a good option if you're wanting to kind of review for and potentially another vendor partner, ensure that they're being effective. That's certainly one way to do that. Obviously, going side by side and doing a split, and whether that's payer or how alpha or how you split that. But obviously, going head to head is going to kind of give you a very good idea of who's performing against what. So splitting it that way, typically, and giving everyone the same pass to go out and get it, I think is something that is probably a little bit stronger to get a true feel of side by side. If your intent is to review the performance, then side by side's great. If you just want to make sure that you're not leaving anything off the table and you're happy with your vendor, second pass is certainly an option. The other option that we don't really see, and this is an approach across the aisle, is essentially throwing up a jump ball. And you have two vendors in place, and whoever IDs it, that's who owns that opportunity. You don't really see that in the provider space, but certainly could be interesting.
Okay. Well, I appreciate all the guidance you provided here. If someone were to be interested in exploring a ZBA partnership with Trend, how can they reach us?
Website is easy. If anyone wants to reach out to me directly, LinkedIn is always the best way to get to me.
Right on. Thank you, David.
Absolutely. Thanks.